Have you ever been told your work wasn't valuable, not because your performance was poor, but because your job title wasn't impressive enough? That's exactly what happened to me. And 6 months later, the same people who dismissed me were asking for my signature. My name is Daniel. At 25, I worked as a junior business analyst for a mid-sized technology consulting company in Denver. The word junior was attached to my title, but it definitely wasn't attached to my workload. Our team built software solutions for hospitals, banks, and retail companies. Officially, I was supposed to assist senior analysts by gathering data and preparing reports. Unofficially, I was doing almost everything. I built dashboards. I stayed late fixing client presentations. I solved problems before they reached management. Sometimes I'd spend an entire weekend preparing reports that my manager would present on Monday morning as if he had created them himself. At first, I didn't mind. Everyone starts somewhere. I believed hard work would eventually be rewarded. My annual review proved otherwise. My manager, Greg, smiled as he handed me a printed evaluation. Excellent work this year. Every category exceeded expectations. Problem solving? Outstanding. Communication? Outstanding. Client feedback? Outstanding. I couldn't hide my smile. Finally. Then Greg said something I'll never forget. Unfortunately, we won't be adjusting your salary this year. I frowned. I'm sorry, what? He leaned back in his chair. Budget constraints. That sounded strange considering the company had just celebrated its most profitable year ever. I've taken on responsibilities that weren't part of my original role. Greg nodded. I know. I've led client meetings. I know. I've trained 2 new hires. I know. So, why? Greg looked uncomfortable. I'd suggest speaking with HR. The next afternoon, I scheduled a meeting. Sitting across from me was Linda, the HR business partner. She listened politely while I explained everything. I showed her performance reviews, client feedback, projects I'd completed, even a list of additional responsibilities I'd taken on over the past 18 months. When I finished, she folded her hands together. Daniel, you've done exceptional work. For a moment, I thought she understood. Then she smiled. But we don't negotiate with junior staff. I blinked. I'm sorry. Salary bands are fixed. But I'm already performing work above my level. I understand. Then why not promote me? That's not how our process works. So what's the process? You continue demonstrating your value. I've been doing that for 2 years. She smiled again. The company appreciates your patience. Patience. That word hit harder than I expected. Because patience was starting to feel a lot like being taken advantage of. As I stood to leave, Linda added one final sentence. If we make exceptions for one junior employee, everyone will expect the same treatment. I thanked her for her time. But the truth was, my decision had already been made. Not out of anger. Out of clarity. If the company believed my title mattered more than my contribution, then I needed to find a company that believed the opposite. I updated my resume that night. Within 3 weeks, I had interviews with 4 different firms. One of them was a fast-growing healthcare technology company called Nexabridge. Unlike my current employer, they didn't spend the interview asking about my title. They asked about my work. They wanted examples. Challenges I'd solved. Clients I'd supported. Ideas I'd introduced. At the end of my final interview, the hiring manager smiled. You've been doing senior-level work for a long time. I laughed. I've been saying that. She slid an offer letter across the table. Senior Solutions Consultant. A 40% salary increase. Annual bonus. Hybrid schedule. Professional development budget. I accepted before leaving the building. When I handed Greg my resignation 2 days later, he looked genuinely shocked. You found another job? I did. You should have talked to me first. I almost laughed. I did. He didn't respond. For the next 2 weeks, I documented my work, trained the team, and left on good terms. No angry emails. No dramatic goodbye. No burned bridges. Because I had learned something valuable. You never know who you'll meet again in business. 6 months passed faster than I expected. At Nexabridge, I led strategic technology projects for hospital networks across the Midwest. One Monday morning, my director walked into my office. "Daniel, we're expanding." "That's great. We need a consulting partner for a nationwide rollout." He placed a proposal on my desk. "I want you to lead the selection process." I opened the folder. There were 5 companies bidding for the contract. The 4th logo stopped me cold. It was my former employer. The same company, the same executives, the same HR department. And according to the proposal, they desperately needed this contract after losing several major clients. I leaned back in my chair. Life has a funny way of bringing people back together. Only this time, I wasn't sitting across the table asking for a raise. I was the person deciding whether they would win a multi-million-dollar contract. I closed the proposal and stared at the company logo for a few seconds. 6 months ago, I had walked out of that building carrying a cardboard box with my desk plant and a framed photo of my family. Now I was sitting in a glass office overlooking downtown Denver, helping decide who would receive one of the biggest consulting contracts our company had ever awarded. I wasn't interested in revenge. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. My director, Amanda, interrupted my thoughts. "You know this company?" I nodded. "I used to work there." She raised an eyebrow. "Any conflict of interest?" "I don't think so." "Good. Then you'll probably understand their strengths and weaknesses better than anyone." I smiled politely. If they earn the contract, they should get it. And I meant that. I wasn't going to sabotage anyone. I wanted the process to be fair. Something I'd never been given. 2 weeks later, the final presentations began. Each consulting firm had 90 minutes to convince our leadership team they were the right partner. The first 3 presentations were solid. Nothing extraordinary. Then the receptionist announced the final team. "They're here." The conference room door opened. Greg walked in first. Behind him, Linda from HR. I almost laughed. Of all the people they could have brought to a client meeting, they brought the 2 people who had convinced themselves I'd never matter. Neither of them recognized me at first. I wasn't wearing the cheap polo shirts from my old office anymore. I was wearing a tailored navy suit with a Nexabridge badge clipped to my jacket. When Amanda stood up to introduce the evaluation committee, Greg looked directly at me. His face froze. Linda blinked twice. Neither of them spoke. Amanda smiled. "This is Daniel Brooks, our senior solutions consultant. He'll be leading the evaluation and implementation process." Greg forced a smile. "It's nice to see you again." "You too." Linda looked uncomfortable. "I didn't realize you worked here." "I didn't either." The room fell silent for a moment. Then Amanda spoke. "Let's begin." For the next hour, Greg presented slides filled with promises. We pride ourselves on developing long-term client relationships. I almost looked around to see if anyone else noticed the irony. He talked about employee development, talent retention, leadership, company culture. Every sentence sounded like it belonged in a brochure, not reality. Then Amanda asked the first question. "How do you retain high-performing employees working below their job level?" Greg hesitated. "We have structured career pathways." I kept my expression neutral. Amanda continued. "What if someone consistently exceeds expectations but requests a salary review before the promotion cycle?" Greg glanced toward Linda. She answered, "We follow standardized HR policies to ensure fairness." Those words sounded familiar. Too familiar. When it was my turn to ask questions, I didn't mention my history. Instead, I opened one of their proposal documents. "Your proposal says client continuity is one of your biggest strengths." Greg smiled. "Absolutely. So, let's imagine your lead consultant on a major account resigns. What steps do you take to protect that client relationship?" Greg answered confidently. "We have detailed documentation and transition plans." I nodded. "So your client relationships aren't dependent on individual employees?" "Exactly." "Good to know." I wrote something on my notepad. Greg's confidence slipped just a little. After the presentation ended, Amanda turned to me. "What do you think?" I answered honestly. "The technical proposal is strong." "It is. But..." I took a deep breath. I have concerns about consistency between what they promise clients and how they manage their people. Amanda leaned forward. Explain. For the next 20 minutes, I stayed completely professional. I didn't complain. I didn't insult anyone. I simply described my experience. How responsibilities increased without recognition. How promotions were delayed despite documented performance. How HR dismissed conversations before they even started. I even showed copies of my performance reviews. Every rating exceeded expectations. Every salary adjustment denied. Amanda read quietly. Finally, she looked up. They actually told you they don't negotiate with junior staff? Word for word. Another executive frowned. So they admit performance doesn't matter if your title is low enough. That was my experience. Amanda closed the folder. I think that tells us everything we need to know. 3 days later, the executive committee reached its decision. Another consulting firm won the contract. Not because of revenge. Because they demonstrated better employee retention, stronger client continuity, and higher customer satisfaction. The decision report specifically noted concerns about leadership culture at my former company. That could have been the end of the story. But it wasn't. A week later, Amanda received a phone call from my former company's CEO. He requested a meeting. Not to challenge the decision. To understand why they had lost. Amanda asked if I wanted to attend. I agreed. The meeting took place over video conference. The CEO looked exhausted. We'd appreciate honest feedback. Amanda nodded toward me. Daniel? I spoke calmly. Your proposal was technically excellent. So why didn't we win? Because trust isn't built with PowerPoint slides. He stayed quiet. I continued. Your presentation emphasized valuing people. But my experience suggested something different. The CEO looked confused. What do you mean? I repeated the sentence I'd heard 6 months earlier. We don't negotiate with junior staff. His expression changed immediately. He turned toward Linda. Did you actually say that? She hesitated. Our compensation policy. I didn't ask about policy. The CEO interrupted. I asked whether those words came out of your mouth. Silence. Greg stared at the table. Finally, Linda answered quietly. Yes. The CEO leaned back in his chair. I've spent years telling clients our people are our greatest asset. Then he looked directly at her. And you reduced one of our best employees to a job title. No one spoke. After a long pause, he turned back to Amanda. Thank you for your honesty. The meeting ended. About a month later, I received a LinkedIn message from one of my former coworkers. You probably heard what happened. I hadn't. Greg was no longer managing the consulting division. Linda had been moved out of employee relations after an internal review of HR practices. The company had launched a complete overhaul of its promotion and compensation process. Not because I demanded it. Because losing a major opportunity forced them to look in the mirror. Sometimes revenge isn't watching people fail. Sometimes it's becoming successful enough that the people who underestimated you have to confront the consequences of their own decisions. The day HR told me they didn't negotiate with junior staff. They thought they were protecting company policy. What they were really doing was teaching one of their best employees to take his talent somewhere else. And 6 months later, that decision cost them far more than the raise they refused to discuss.